Good.
Hey, welcome to the final round of the second EIF Winter Championship. We were glad to host over 100 competitors across all divisions, lots of competitors in Extemp, and be giving out UKTOC bids today. We've got three judges on the panel, including myself, Aiden Marks, champion at Stanford, NSGA semifinalist, as well as Robert Zhang, MBA invitee, Glenbrook's finalist, and Florida Blue Key finalist. We look forward to seeing all these wacky hypotheticals. So let's get into it.
Thank you.
And just to confirm with you, Max will be giving you time signals. He's going to give you a standard 5 down, C at 30, and a fist at grace.
Fantastic. Let me pin him to the screen real quick.
Could you give us your question?
After eating too many green eggs and ham, Ted Cruz suddenly falls ill and dies. What can Democrats do to secure his seat? Here's my flow. I can type it on my iPad real quick, the question.
Oh, I just put it in the chat for everyone.
Fantastic. And Max, can you speak for a second so I can pin you to the thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want fist at 7 or fist at grace?
Fist at 7, please.
Okay.
And just to clarify, different judges do this differently. So how do you conduct your last minute?
Your last what?
Your last minute. Like
I'll give you a 1 minute, C at 30, fist at 15, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, fist at 7.
That's fantastic. And just before I begin, here's my flow, and I'll just chuck it behind me for transparency's sake. Let me know when you guys are ready to begin. Max is giving me a thumbs up when all the judges are ready. We begin with the issue Texans care the most about: football. But in the year of 2023, the NFL has taken on a whole new meaning, as the Texas Tribune on March 23rd of 2023 documents. Colin Alred, a former NFL star, has broken ground throughout Texas by beating a Republican in the House of Representatives congressional races. And now he's challenging Ted Cruz on the Senate-wide level. Fortunately for Alred, and unfortunately for Cruz, he might have just received the pass of a century. As Tabby, just 31 minutes ago, explains, Ted Cruz has suddenly fallen ill and died, causing the GOP to scramble for new candidates. And considering that Ted Cruz was a literal monolith of the Texas GOP, who represented the issues GOP members care the most about. Currently, Colin Alred has to not go against just one individual, but the values of an entire party. So, it's only when we consider that not a single Democrat has won a statewide election since 1994 in Texas. If Alred's the first to do it, it could open the floodgates to progressive legislation throughout the state. It becomes imperative we ask today's hypothetical. If and when Ted Cruz suddenly eats too many green eggs and ham and suddenly falls ill and dies, what can Democrats do to secure his Senate seat? The answer is simple. Democrats now more than ever before need to address the issues Republicans won't touch. We can see this through three key venues of analysis. First, the school voucher system. Second, the issue of abortion. And finally, the issue of infrastructure. Ted Cruz earlier this year said, "If I ever die, I want my tombstone to engrave on it that I supported school choice more than anyone else." Well, I hate to break the news to you, buddy, but you're dead. The first way on how Ted Cruz's seat can be captured by Democrats is if Democrats focus on the school voucher system. According to Texas Monthly, this time 2 months ago, they document Democrats are losing the minority vote in drives, specifically the Hispanic one. This is because Republicans are able to capture more family values like security, crime, and the economy that have appealed minorities to the GOP. But Democrats in this case have a silver bullet to slay the Republican Party. This time, as the New York Times on December 1st of 2023 explains, the school voucher system proposed in Texas is widely unpopular. In fact, 51% of Democrats and Republicans alike oppose the bill. What this bill is trying to accomplish is it's taking out public school funding based on each student and putting it in private schools. This might sound good on paper, but it causes impoverished students to lose any source of public school funding, as the schools they love and treasure become a husk of their former selves. If Democrats can focus on honing on this issue, especially on minority populations, they can gain additional votes and win back the Latino ones, because education and the future of one's youth is the start of every immigrant's story. But secondly, when you pass legislation that affects half the country might not want to vote for you. The second reason why Democrats can capture the seat is by hammering down on the issue of abortion. Specifically, 585, a nonpartisan polling website, explains, over the course of the past year, trends are steady that show over 60% of Texas women are against anti-abortion bills. And this is super significant. As the National Association of Women Voters explains to us just 2 weeks ago, women vote more than men in the state of Texas, as they feel familial values and their own personal rights are two of the most important concepts. In this case, when Democrats hammer down on the woman's side, when they hammer down on the issue of abortion, then they can have newfound success. Look no further than Virginia, where Democrats in that state beat up Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin, were once expecting a red wave. Instead, a blue wave occurred in 2023, because during the midterms, Democrats hammered through the issue of abortion in Virginia and flipped over 18 seats. The Democrats right now in Texas only have to flip one, and the issue of abortion can be more pressing than ever before. But finally, the proof is in the pudding. The only time Ted Cruz saw his approval ratings freeze was during the winter freeze, when he went to Cancun for a noble 2-week-long political vacation. But even despite the scandal, Republicans still supported the GOP candidate. And that's because radicalization across the country has become so prevalent. GOP members think moderates simply don't care about them on the Democrat side. The third reason on how Democrats can beat Ted Cruz and win his seat, despite the fact that Ted Cruz is already dead, is by focusing on moderate and bipartisan infrastructure bills. Specifically, according to Texas Monthly, this time in the month of January, it explains that right after the winter freezes, Ted Cruz saw his approval ratings plummet, but suddenly rise again as he and Governor Greg Abbott put the blame on the other side of the aisle, blaming radicalization as the reason why they couldn't put meaningful infrastructure projects on the table. What Democrats need to do right now is be the bigger man and pass new infrastructure projects with the help of their Republican counterparts. This showcases a way on how Democrats can reach across the aisle, get the moderate votes, and most importantly, build projects that everyone can prosper from. Because as the United States Study Center on March 23rd of 2022 explains, during the most politically divided time since the end of the Civil War, this is the first step Democrats can take to put us on a path of bipartisanship. So at the end of the day, while this hypothetical addresses the fact that Ted Cruz is dead, in reality, he's not, and Democrats need to still be able to beat him. So it's only when we return to today's question, Ted Cruz eats too many green eggs and ham, passes away, and now Democrats need a strategy. We can see the way Democrats can win is by focusing on the issues Republicans won't care about. First, through school vouchers. Secondly, on the issue of abortion. And finally, on the issue of helping everyone through infrastructure. So one day, NFL athlete Colin Allen might not just have a field day on the pitch, but instead in the Texas Senate and federal government as well.
That was a final time of 7 minutes and 13 seconds.
I'll mute and be ready for, oh, wait, never mind. Questioning is happening now.
Congrats on a really awesome speech.
Thank you.
You can actually see me. Okay, so 3-minute crossfire, right?
Yes, and then you will get a 2, a 1, a 30, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 fist when you're done.
All right, awesome. And it's okay if I time myself as well?
Mhm.
Okay, so in that case, once again, that was a really awesome speech and also a very interesting hypothetical. And I'll start my time now. So, in general, your speech consists of changing away from Republican policies and moving to more liberal policies. That is, Republican policies that people are sick of, But if people were generally sick of these Republican policies in Texas, then why have they continually voted in Ted Cruz and John Cornyn, the other Republican senator, for tenures of over 10 years?
Well, this question comes in two pieces. First, there's a deviation from the status quo in the year of 2023 because we live in a post-Roe v. Wade era. Like I provided in Virginia, a historically Republican state suddenly was able to flip on the issue of abortion. Democrats can do the same in Texas because now than ever before, there's a deviation from the status quo. Democrats need to capitalize on that.
Yes, sure. But returning back to that same point, if voters were so pressed to move over to liberal perspectives on things like abortion and infrastructure, why didn't they do that when they had the chance in other elections like in 2020, when they continued to vote in Republican senators?
Well, there's an exception to that question. Colin Allred, a Democrat, straight up won Congress seats within the Texas legislature just a few years ago. It shows that the voters are listening. And in this case, they can vote blue. Democrats just need to hammer down on the issues and capitalize on them today.
Interesting. And let's go back to your point about Virginia. Do you think that the issue of abortion was the only reason that Democrats won the election there?
Absolutely not. Each election consists of so many small tidbits and rallying cries. But the foremost issue that got the GOP governor of Virginia, Glenn Youngkin, quaking in his boots was the issue of abortion. In fact, just days after Democrats won, Youngkin claimed that he was going to amend his abortion policies and propose a more moderate view. This showcases that abortion is a key issue that can turn the tide.
Okay, so in that case, let's move on to your second point about abortion. You mentioned that 60% of Texas women are against anti-abortion bills. However, if you look to statistics from the Pew Research Center, you'll find that overall, when looking at all voters, 50% of people in Texas believe abortion should be fully illegal, in contrast to 45% who believe it should be legal and 5% who don't know, which means that if the majority of Texas voters still believe that abortion should be illegal, then how would pressing to get abortion legalized help the Democratic case?
Because it takes a step-by-step process. In this point, Democrats need to focus on capturing the female vote, one that is extremely volatile and can prove successful. It's a policy-by-policy basis. Democrats can win other demographics through different policies, but for women, the issue of abortion can be pressed by Democrats to spell them a stunning blue tide.
Awesome. Congrats on a really awesome crossfire and making finals.
Thank you.
So in that case, I'm going to go back to the prep room and draw my questions. See you in a bit.
All right, awesome. And do we have our second speaker in the room? Anish.
They're unable to unmute.
Unable to unmute? Okay, all good. If you could just take a sec to fix that. Let me join Zoom and come back. Okay, well, whenever our second speaker comes back, they're going to be answering question 5. Joe Biden falls down a set of stairs and realizes that if he can no longer run, he should not run for president. Who should replace him as the Democratic nominee? Once again, for judges and audience, before Anish comes back, Joe Biden falls down a set of stairs and realizes that if he can no longer run, he should not run for president. Who should replace him as the Democratic nominee?
I think it may be a permission thing.
I'm giving them permission to unmute. I'll put the question in the chat, Aiden. You
Sorry
got
about
it?
that. Oh, would you like me to write the question in the chat?
I got it, don't worry.
Okay, awesome.
And that is the right question? Joe Biden, stairs, no longer running? Yeah. Cool.
Okay.
All right. Well, congratulations, Anish, on making finals. Max will
Thanks
give you
so
time
much.
signals, standard 5 down. We're ready to go when you are.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And you'll be giving me my time signals, right?
Yeah. Would you like So I'll
Oh.
do standard 5 down, C at 30, 15, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, fist at 7.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
During the past 3 years, the Biden administration, as well as Joe Biden, have slowly become more accustomed to the role of president and cabinet. However, through all of that, one thing still remains to be bugging Joe Biden, and that is his ability to fall over almost every object humanly possible. Whether it be falling off his bike or falling up the stairs, Joe Biden has been plagued by it. And although this is just a funny meme posted on X, formerly known as Twitter, it truly depicts how people are viewing him. According to The Economist, in an article published on December 15th of 2023, they say that Joe Biden currently has an approval rating of 39%. And considering the fact he's supposed to be the next Democratic nominee, if his own voters aren't supporting him, then who will vote him in the 2024 election? So considering the fact, as Robert and Willie just reported to me 30 minutes ago, that Joe Biden has fallen down the stairs and will not be able to compete in the 2024 election, we ask ourselves today's question: who should replace Joe Biden as the Democratic nominee? And the answer clearly is Marianne Williamson, due to the fact that she appeals to a wide voter base through her legislation in 3 key areas. 1, through her want to raise the federal minimum wage. 2, through her want to quell racial inequality, especially through wealth. And 3, through her want to address climate change concerns. Now, a large notion about Democrats is that they are unable to handle the economy. And fortunately for the Democratic Party and Marianne Williamson, she is able to challenge just that. Which brings me to my first point on why she's the ample choice to replace Joe Biden. And that is through her projected policy to raise the federal minimum wage. According to the Center of American Progress in an article published on June 10th of 2023, 53% of all Americans, bipartisan, meaning both Republican and Democratic, want there to be an increase in the federal minimum wage, stating that the current minimum wage at about 12 is unlivable in some situations. And as a result, they want to improve the quality of life of everyone in the United States. And this has not been touched by the Republican Party or the Democratic Party in a high ordeal. However, Marianne Williamson strays away from that notion. According to the New York Times, in an article published on March 3rd of 2023, when she first announced her run as a Democratic nominee, one of her main contingent points was raising this federal minimum wage. And she said that the after effects of this would be that the economy that was currently then and still slowing down due to Federal Reserve interest rates would speed back up as people have more money on hand and can fuel into the economy. And so, as is evident, she already appeals to so many people with the idea of raising the wage, and the benefits it will have on the economy will introduce an entirely new demographic of voters. And as is evident, considering the fact that the Republican Party is not even engrossing on this idea, it will allow her as the Democratic nominee to stray much farther ahead of the Republican Party. In the United States, an average Black family makes 24 cents on the dollar that a white family does. And people for decades have been wanting this to change. And Marianne Williamson can do just that, which brings me to my second point on why she's the best replacement for Joe Biden. And that is through her want to stop racial injustice through the wealth gap. According to the Wall Street Journal, in an article published on May 24th of 2023, they say that currently 61% of people say that they want their leader, whether it be presidential or congressional, to fight against racial injustice. And this would be through racial profiling, police brutality, and especially through the massive wealth gap, which is shown to affect major minority groups. And ultimately, once again, Marianne Williamson is showing that she can do just that. As NBC News points out in an article published on December 12th of 2023, they say that she has already hypothesized with her group in her home state of Michigan, but also planning to reveal on the presidential level that she wants to make changes for minority groups to help curb wealth inequality. And this would be through government welfare programs, whether it be affordable housing or subsidized healthcare, as well as weighted taxes, where the poor would be taxed less and the rich be taxed higher. And ultimately, surprising to many people, 37% of all Americans are already on board with this idea. And seeing how she's already grabbing such a large voter demographic with only one hypothetical policy, it's clear that she is the ample and best choice to replace Joe Biden in 2024. And for people of around the nation, they have seen failed climate initiatives such as the Kyoto Protocol in the 90s, as well as the Paris Accord just 8 years ago. And people are unhappy on how our country, one of the biggest CO2 emitters in the world, are handling the climate issue. But Marianne Williamson can fix that, which brings me to my third and final point on why she is the best replacement for Joe Biden as the Democratic nominee, and that is through her want to tackle the climate change issue. According to the Pew Research Center in an article published on April 24th of 2023, 61% of all people in the United States say that they want their leader, once again, congressional and presidential, to tackle climate change as one of their top 3 issues. And as is evident with initiatives such as the Paris Accord and Kyoto Protocol falling flat on their face, that want is growing stronger every single day. And once again, Marianne Williamson is able to combat that. According to ABC News in an article published on October 20th of 2023, she as part of her policies, she says that she wants to switch to renewable energy, which will drastically improve the amount of carbon emissions that the US produces. And through this renewable energy, she wants to create hydropower plants. And to just affirm the logistics, with only a $1.2 billion investment, she will be able to create 8 hydropower plants, which may sound small in number, but will be able to power the entire East Coast and some of the Mideast, showing that she is working for the people, and as such, she's the best replacement for Joe Biden. So as we return to today's question, who should replace Joe Biden as the Democratic nominee? And the answer clearly is Marianne Williamson, due to the fact that her legislation appeals to a widespread bipartisan audience in three key methods. 1, through her want to raise the federal minimum wage. 2, through her want to eliminate racial inequality. And 3, through her want to address climate change. Thank you.
That was a final time of 7 minutes and 8 seconds.
Perfect, thank you.
And then,
they're ready for questions.
and then there will be a 3-minute cross. You will get a 2, a 1, see at 30, 15, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, fist when it's done.
Yep, thank you. Wait, I'm just gonna go to my cross exercise just so I can see them. All right, perfect.
Let me know when you're ready to begin.
I'm ready to begin.
Fantastic speech. I just had a couple of questions. First, on your thesis. Joe Biden was selected by the DNC in 2020 due to his bland and moderate appeals. Williamson, on the other hand, seems to be more radical on the progressive side, advocating for wealth redistribution through the African American community and others. Won't she be demonized by the GOP and seen as too radical to be elected?
All right, for the first part of that question, you mentioned that statistic came from 2020, right? Where they rated Joe Biden as a moderate candidate. But 4 years have passed and Joe Biden's entire term has also passed. So as his policies and ideologies as president have changed, it's likely that Republican and Democratic voters won't view him in the same way for the 2024 election. And for your second point, although yes, Marianne Williamson may have some pieces of radical Democratic legislation, the 3 main ones that are the core parts of her run are not very liberal in of itself, such as raising the federal minimum wage has been talked about by other candidates which are Republican in the past. So to answer your point.
That's great. Now, let's move on to the first point about your federal minimum wage. Even though you quote this is insanely popular, in most Democratic strongholds like New York and California, they already have wages on the state level higher than the minimum wage. How will these policies rally the Democratic bases in these areas?
Wait, sorry, could you repeat the question? You cut out for just the last part, please.
How will enacting minimum wage help Marianne Williamson gain popularity in areas like New York and California, where wages are already higher than the minimum average?
Well, I introduced the idea of a federal minimum wage because it's a bipartisan initiative, which means that it claims both Republican and Democratic. So if the Democratic Party is looking for a nominee that will not only win their nomination, but also help win them the 2024 election, it's clear that they can't just focus on Democratic strongholds like New York, but rather they would have to try and win over other Republican areas. So a federal minimum wage, although it's already been increased in New York, may not be increased in another state, which could be Republican, that would then in turn support Marianne Williamson.
That's great. Now, let's move on to your second point about wealth redistribution. Considering the stigmatized state of welfare currently in our status quo, wouldn't increasing welfare, especially means-based welfare, cause the American public to simply think she's too radical of a candidate?
Well, the idea of government welfare has maybe stigmatized, but in the past few years, especially with COVID-19 stimulus checks coming out and the overall quality of life of the American people decreasing due to economic effects, it's very unlikely that people, especially when helping out such a large minority group, will be so against and view Marianne Williamson as some sort of radical figure that wants to switch to some socialist or communist thing, as has been done with Democratic candidates like Bernie Sanders in the past, and instead seeing their real life communities go to waste, they'll probably be more motivated to support some of her liberal policies.
Thank you. And the last question about your third point on global warming. Wouldn't progressive policies in the current status quo that shift away from fossil fuels and onto renewables cause the fossil fuel industry and the millions of workers it supports to be antagonized and not vote for the DNC?
That's a fair point, but a large majority of all of the oil importation comes externally. Although yes, in Alaska and other regions of the US, there are a considerable amount of oil reserves, it's nothing compared to what's exported. And if we think about it, with hydropower plants and renewable energy sources, even more jobs will be created. So in turn, people won't be losing jobs. And in fact, there may even be a net gain of jobs in the United States.
Thank you. And once again, congrats on a fantastic speech.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, can I spectate?
Yes, Waleed, you're muted.
Hello, everyone. My name is Roshan Shivnani. I should be your third speaker today. Is that correct?
That's right.
Yeah. Wait, sorry, what'd you say?
Yeah, that's right. You're our third speaker today.
Okay. So in terms of timing my speech, would you guys prefer to give time signals, or are you guys okay with me timing myself?
I can give time signals.
You're good to time yourself, but Max is our official time that we're keeping, and he'll give you a standard 5 down fistic race. Obviously, you're all good to keep time on your own as well.
Roshan, would you rather fist at 7 or fist at grace?
I'd rather fist at 7, please.
Yeah.
Okay.
And our speaker number 3 will be answering the question, upset that Nicholas Ostheimer didn't go through with his arranged marriage, Vladimir Putin decides to finish off the West by deploying tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine. How should the United States respond? And I'll get that in the chat as well.
Oh, I just put it in the chat, but
Oh, awesome.
It's a bit of a wordy one. And then for full transparency, here's my flow pad I used to prep. I'll put it behind me so I won't be able to see it during my speech. So long as all judges can give me a sign of life, I'm happy to begin. All the way back during former President Obama's presidency, he decided to have a foreign policy meeting with Russian leader Vladimir Putin, and their selected activity of choice, shirtless horseback riding. Yet it's clear times have changed because Putin's no longer horsing around. Because as the Center for Strategic and International Studies writes on September 9th of this year, that while now Putin has used the nuclear word on dozens of occasions, many are wondering if he actually now means it. Because as they continue, Russia has seen insurmountable losses as a result of the war, such as 25% of their military personnel, along with economic damages at home. And as a result, Putin has called on his biggest fallback, nuclear weapons, even threatening to reoperate a former nuclear site near Ukraine itself. But it's one considering that his foreign policy quantifies on February 6th of this year, that in the time it took anyone in this round to prep their own speech, a nuke could have been launched, and Ukraine could be 6 feet under. It's time we ask the question. Upset that Nicholas Ostheimer didn't go through with his arranged marriage, Vladimir Putin decides to finish off the West by deploying tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine. How should the United States respond? The answer is by taking measures to mitigate the damage now. and in the future. But more specifically, by first, using NATO as a pipeline to get resources through to refugees. Second, by using the ICJ to win over other allies within the United Nations. And finally, by continuing to double down on technology so that one day we could prevent nuclear weapons altogether. But it's no surprise to anyone that as a result of current war, millions of Ukrainians have had to flee for their lives. But in the hypothetical world, it only gets worse. But that's why the first reason, or way we'll see the West respond and help mitigate damage as a result of the use of nuclear weapons within Ukraine, is by using a NATO as a pipeline for refugees. Because, as explained by a separate article from Foreign Policy, this time on April of this year, that right now millions of Ukrainians have been forced to leave their country. And as a result, they've turned to the same set of actors, namely nations like Poland or the Czech Republic, with the leader Poland having to take in 675,000 refugees. And as an article from NATO Further writes when explaining the situation from Poland's perspective, they find that oftentimes these smaller European nations, while having close geographic proximity to the war, often don't have the resources to uphold these immigrants themselves. And as a result of the 43 million citizens who still live in Ukraine, in a chance or world we saw nuclear war, that would only force millions to leave their homes. But the United States can help use NATO as a pipeline, because nations like Poland themselves have been loyal members, with Poland being in NATO since 1999. So while the United States clearly isn't close enough to actually aid in supporting refugees, by using as NATO as a pipeline to get their resources through to European nations, not only do they ensure that the resources are ultimately given, but these nations are able to support their current populations and unfortunately the future ones that are likely to come. But the second, we see that the United States should respond under the idea that Russia decides to launch tactical nuclear weapons on Ukraine to mitigate their losses is by using the ICJ to win over other bodies. Because as the United Nations writes on their public blog back in 2022, that the ICJ, or International Court of Justice, is a body that's obviously designed to grant justice, and as a result, has different levels of court case and violations, which they use to govern the international world as a whole. One of the biggest violations being the use of nuclear weapons without any pre-context that would have deserved it. But while Russia doesn't respect the ICJ, otherwise Putin's two previous warrants would have ended him up in jail. But that doesn't mean other nations don't either, because as the United Nations continues, under Article 19, within their own agreements, they sign off that the 193 members of the United Nations are automatically joined in partying with the ICJ, conceding to the agreements with exceptions of nations like Russia who pulls out. And what that means is by getting the signed proof that Russia is actually doing damage at the highest level of crime, the United States can win over support of other nations like India, who have largely abstained with the context that Russia didn't do anything with no proof in the first place. And so long as proof meets these other nations, and the United States can galvanize other nations to help out as well, we can see an international solution to an international problem. But during his presidency, former President Donald Trump used the presidency to attack Ukraine in the same way he uses his toilet seat. He likes to drop a lot of bombs. But getting away from this approach gives us the third way. We can see that the United States should respond to increased aggression, assuming tactical nukes are used in Ukraine, by turning to other methods of combating Russia, by developing new technology. Because as defense.org, a website that's been documenting defense for over a decade, writes in their February monthly articles, right now it's been a long time since solution has seen an RMA, or a revolution related to military assistance, with the last being the inventions of things like gunpowder. But while no country in the world currently has the capacity to stop nuclear weapons, that doesn't mean any nation is close. They quantify, assuming we take the US's current level of policy and spending within the military, by 2030, it is estimated we will at least have a system in place to combat nukes. But By using this trend and further doubling down on the approach by spending more money specifically in technology and innovation, we can develop a pipeline, resources, and technology to make sure no nation has to face the same fate. So when we return to the question, upset that Nicholas Ostheimer didn't go through with his arranged marriage, Vladimir Putin decides to finish off the West by deploying tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine. How should the United States respond? The answer was abundantly clear. We need mitigatory measures. So while Putin may be horsing around in his horse stable, it's clear that the United States only needs to take measures to stabilize the situation once and for all.
That was a final time of 7 minutes and 12 seconds. And there will be a 3-minute cross. You will get the 2, the 1, 30, 15, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. When I do the fist, please try and finish up as soon as possible.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
Perfect. Also, when you give up the fist, can you just like say something, because then the screen will like switch onto you, then we can like see it. Because when we both
Yeah,
are
I'd be happy to. Is
awesome.
that okay with you, Roshan?
Yeah, that's perfect.
First off, I just want to say, great speech, commendable job memorizing the entire prompt of the question, and very funny speech. I'm ready. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Awesome. So I just want to talk about your first point. You say that the US can convince NATO, countries in NATO to take in refugees.
It's not convincing them to take in refugees, but giving resources to the nations who've already proved they want to do so, but don't have the resources to continue doing so.
All right. And knowing the fact that the US is currently under a government spending crisis with the debt limit approaching every single day, where will they get adequate funds to do this kind of action?
So it's not exactly that we need new funds. As I'm sure you already know, we send billions of dollars to Ukraine, being in terms of nations, the nation that spends the most on the country. What we need to do is not necessarily spend more, but divert our current aid into these more effective pipelines to make sure the money gets where the refugees are.
Awesome, that's fair. And can you give me an example of some of these countries that would be willing to act as a...
For example, I tell you Poland, the nation who's taken in the most refugees, almost half or slightly over 500,000. They've currently been able to take in these refugees, but have noted they will have trouble doing so without further resources. And so if the United States were to step in, divert our funding into resources for these nations, we'd be able to support them.
All right. And for a country like Poland, which has already said, yes, they are taking in refugees, but has already experienced that they kind of want to isolate themselves away from the war, how do you know that they're going to continue to want to host these refugees? And if the time comes and they don't, what is going to happen to all of those refugees already in Poland?
So those are two separate questions. I'll start off on the first one. So in terms of keeping them involved, obviously there can be no fundamental guarantee. What we have to look at is what's most likely to take in refugees. So if we look at the nations closest by, nuclear weapons determine their destination and arrive pretty fast. So the refugees would often need to go to these European nations. So by giving them resources, we allow them to do so in the first place. But let's continue on to the fact that let's assume Poland, let's say, magically decides to stop accepting refugees. With the refugees that are in Poland, as your second point points out, we can then help them go to other NATO nations. And out of the 31 members, there's an extreme likelihood at least one would be able to support more refugees, given that they had the support of the United States aid.
Interesting. Fair point. So let's move on to your second point, where you say the ICJ will be able to reprimand Putin for his crimes. However, in the past year, I believe Putin, as you mentioned, already has 2 slaps on the wrist. So
I was trying, yeah, I'm glad you bring this up, because this was a caveat I'm trying to make, that Vladimir Putin doesn't accept these warrants. So it's not like the ICJ is magically going to detain him. But what's more important is the fact that a warrant exists in the first place, specifically a nuclear one, which is the highest degree of warrant that can be used as evidence to get the support of other nations like India, who've abstained from supporting Russia under the pretext that there's no fundamental evidence out there in the first place.
That's time.
all right, perfect. Thank you so much. Great speech.
Thank you.
For the following stuff. All right, thank you guys so much. Have a good one.
Thank you. We're now in line for our 4th speaker. I believe that's going to be Arya. Are you ready? Just checking in.
Yes. Yeah, can you guys
Okay,
hear me? And can you guys see
fantastic.
me all right?
Yep, we can.
Okay.
And I
Okay,
have
great.
the question copied in here. I'll drop it in the chat. Max is going to
Okay.
give you a 5 down and a fist at Grace. Just to read the question out for everyone. Desperately needing friends, Joe Biden invites South Korea and Japan into NATO. How can China protect their influence in Asia?
Would you rather fist at 7 or fist at Grace?
Could you have a fist at 7? No, fist at Grace. Fist at Grace.
Fist at Grace.
please.
All right.
Yeah.
We got standard
And I'm
5.
having some connectivity issues, so I might like glitch out in the middle. Just giving you all a heads up so nothing throws anyone off. So yeah. Yes. And let me know if there is any like issue on your end so we can get that.
Oh wait, and before we begin, I did judge you in semis, but would it be possible for you to stand up during your speech just because
Yeah, right now there's I'm not like in the position to like stand up because there's a like something in the back right now. Would it be okay if I because it might make me some like more time to set it up. Would it be okay if I sat down?
are the other judges okay with that? I'm good with it.
I don't mind.
Okay.
And the round's already going.
All right, sounds good.
Okay. Okay. Are all my judges ready? Good, 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 great. It can seem like sometimes Joe Biden doesn't have any friends. I mean, hey, I get it. He's a bit old and the poll numbers are dropping, but hey, everyone deserves to have some friends. And for him, he just found a pair of best friends. Who, you may ask? South Korea and Japan. Look to Harvard Magazine on June 12th of 2023 when they write, with South Korea and Japan being dominant powers in Asia, they have quite a lot of influence over the entire geopolitical region. But over both of them is a reigning power, China. From the Tang Dynasty to modern day society, China views both of these countries extremely strategic in moving forward their own ambitions. And so, considering that these two countries play a pivotal role in the entire geopolitical state of our economy, but also the stability of our future generations, it becomes imperative that we look towards today's question. Desperately needing friends, Joe Biden invites South Korea and Japan into NATO. How can China protect their influence in Asia? And the answer is that China can protect their influence in Asia by looking towards avenues that they hadn't explored in the past, but more specifically, in 3 key ways. First, by looking towards developing countries and bolstering their economic relationships with them. But secondly, increasing the overall investment and trade networks they have in status quo. Before finally looking at the fact that they need to protect growing investments and establish legitimacy that's going to help them further maintain their economic position that they have right now. I don't know about you, but if I wanted to run a country, I'd probably want to make sure everyone around me was happy. And it seems like China isn't getting this message. And that leads me to my first point of what China needs to do is bolster relationships with developing countries in Asia. But to understand why China even needs to do this, let's take a step back and understand its current relationship with developing countries. Look to the Brookings Institute on January 22nd of 2023 when they state that China's approach in most developing countries is less aggressive. However, it's still frequently corrosive of democratic institutions, increasing corruption, and undermining financial and political independence. China, in part to defend its economic interests, also interferes in the political systems of developing countries around the world, tipping the scales towards China friendly politicians and policies. But here's where the real problem starts when China continues to do that. Look to the Reuters on May 19th of 2023 when they state that if China wants to maintain the power they've gained over the last decade, the leaders need to sharpen their focus on those aspects of developing country relationships. They're deemed to likely bolster the party's fortunes amid any turbulence they might see. Essentially, they need to shift away from their power-hungry outlook towards a more inclusive approach, which includes these developing countries first and foremost if they want to maintain that economic prosperity that they've gained right now. But secondly, let's look towards how they need to maintain overseas investments and the creation of markets specifically abroad for Chinese goods and materials. You may be wondering, what impact is South Korea and Japan leaving going to have on China's vast economy? I mean, after all, it seems like China controls the manufacturing industry and is one of the largest powers. Well, that number may be a bit bigger than what you're originally thinking. Look to the Wilson Center on January 7th of 2023 when they state that the two largest places where China imports from is mostly South Korea, hovering around $158 billion, and then Japan in the number 2 spot, hovering over $153 billion. Both countries account for a large percentage of China's GDP as a whole, and that's the exact problem. If China wants to maintain its presence in our international society, they're going to have to start trading more with other diverse countries to ensure that they don't fall behind while South Korea and Japan go to America. And so, as the Wall Street Journal on March 12th of 2023 writes, the party's legitimacy depends on the health of the Chinese economy. Access to resources needed to feed China's growing economy have long driven its engagement with the developing world. But China's economy is now currently struggling. Chinese leaders are therefore looking to further boost overseas investment and trade, which has been growing for years, but has partially been rebranded under the Belt Road Initiative. And so, what China needs to do right now is to make sure that their international presence is increased abroad and that their overall imports aren't solely dependent on two major countries, which are South Korea and Japan. But going on to my last point about how China needs to protect growing investments and establish legitimacy. But why is legitimacy even a problem for China in the first place? Well, according to the New York Times on June 12th of 2023, in countries like Zambia, Sri Lanka, and Malaysia, they've been burdened under heavy Chinese debts, creating for a political problem between China and these countries. The leaders of this country have now fiercely come out saying that independence is a top priority for them. But that's exactly why China needs to protect and legitimize its legitimacy. Because look to Al Jazeera on November 19th of 2023 when they say that Beijing needs to protect its growing investments, ensure party control over ideology and information that might enter China, and legitimize China's authoritarian development model. But passing a positive China story is essential as it helps to smooth the path for investments that benefit China's economy in the long term. We have to recognize that a more positive perception of China keeps away criticism of these Chinese investments and a corruption of countries' elites, thereby preventing Chinese influence from being a political issue, a key point China needs to establish if they want to maintain their influence. And so, when we come back to today's question, desperately needing friends, Joe Biden invites South Korea and Japan into NATO. How can China protect their influence in Asia? And the answer is by exploring new undiscovered routes, such as bolstering relations with developing countries, overseas investments, and protecting growing investments and establishing legitimacy. Thank you.
That was a final time of 7 minutes and 20 seconds. We will now have a 3-minute cross. You will get a 2, a 1, 30, 15, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then I will speak when I give the fist just in case you guys can't see it.
Okay. Start off, as usual, great speech, just a couple of questions. So I want to start off on a more overarching question. You tell us that what we need to do initially as like the thesis of your answer is taking avenues we haven't yet explored, with some of them being investment in developing countries. But you also mentioned the BRI, which has caused China to be the nation that invests most in developing countries. So isn't it an avenue they've already explored?
Yeah, so the thing with this avenue specifically is, yeah, they've given investments to developing countries, but the system in which they've given these investments has been more of a predatory loan system, whereas they give countries like Sri Lanka and Zambia these loans, and then they set them into this trap. And so essentially, what I'm proposing is that now China sets out to give economic support to these countries and create trade relations and bolster their overall relationship rather than trying to give them money, which can help
Okay,
them in their long term.
Okay, I'll touch on that in your third point, but let's go on to your second point. You say that South Korea and Japan are China's biggest importers. Why is that?
Yeah, so South Korea and Japan are China's most biggest importers because of the goods they have and the specific materials they have that China isn't able to produce.
Yeah, perfect. So if they have goods China isn't able to produce and are producing them in mass quantity, how would China find a feasible replacement in a short period of time?
Yeah, so that's the issue, right? Right now, since they're only dependent on South Korea and Japan, they only have those two options to go to. Over time, when they bolster relationships with other countries and other various variety of countries, they can get these goods and they can get these materials to them.
Could you give me an example of a nation that they could feasibly do it with that could replace the production of South Korea and Japan?
It would have to depend on what specific good it is. Obviously, there are different countries with different varieties of certain goods that they specialize in. So, South Korea and Japan specialize in two completely different aspects, whereas other countries also specialize in other aspects.
Okay, but wouldn't you agree that South Korea and Japan are the biggest producers in Asia, right?
They're one of the most biggest producers in Asia.
So who are the other big producers?
The other big producers include China and other subcontinent
Yeah.
region
So,
countries.
so mainly China. So if those are the big importers in Asia, and China can't turn to them and have to churn out of Asia, doesn't that contradict the entire question about maintaining influence inside of Asia?
Yeah, so they want to maintain influence within Asia. And what I'm proposing is that they create relationships with other developing countries that they haven't set out with to do before.
And after decades of predatory
That's the
loaning,
issue right now.
oh, sorry. After
After decades of that's why they're developing their relationship first, and then they're getting the benefits in the end.
Wait, so if they've had decades of predatory loaning, you're telling me countries are instantly going to try and trade with them?
They're not going to instantly try to trade with them. What China needs to do first is try to establish their relationship first and then trade with them.
Great speech. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much to our fourth and third speakers for a wonderful cross-examination. I believe we're now in line for our fifth speaker. That's going to be Noah Ryu. Noah?
Hi, guys.
Hey.
I can put my question in the chat for everybody too.
Oh, I've already got it copied from the question doc.
Great.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And for everyone, that's after Xi Jinping loses Winnie the Pooh and throws a tantrum, all BRICS nations adopt the Chinese yuan as their official currency. Does this revive the Chinese economy? And for time signals, Max can go over what he does.
I will give you a standard 5 down, C at 30, this at 15. Would you like a fist at 7 or a fist at grace?
I'll take a fist at 7.
All right, and then a
Cool.
fist at 7, and then I'll cut you off at grace.
Awesome. Appreciate it. Okay. All my judges ready? Are you ready? Okay. It's a Pooh apocalypse. President Xi Jinping's best friend, Winnie the Pooh, finally ran away from him after 50 years of their relationship. Before the crisis, China and Xi Jinping only had a destabilized economy. Now they have a destabilized economy and a depressed president. BBC describes on September 18th of 2023 that China is currently suffering from high unemployment for youth and export struggles, which has placed a severe strain on the Chinese economy. However, China and their BRICS allies are there to help, as they are going to adopt the Chinese yuan currency as their official currency going forward. But considering that this unified yuan currency could be China's economic honeypot, it becomes a matter of international significance that we ask today's question. Or hypothetical, after Xi Jinping loses Winnie the Pooh and throws a tantrum, all the BRICS nations adopt the Chinese yuan as their official currency. Does this revive the Chinese economy? Which the answer is clearly yes, because China and their BRICS allies will gain control over the entire global commerce community. And we can see this for three key reasons. First, through a turbo trade charge. Second, through global financial power to China. And finally, a technological leap through dominance. My New Year's resolutions are already picked out. I want to finally get a girlfriend. But for China, it's going to be completely different, as they want global dominance over the entire world. And they can actually do that with a unified yuan currency with their BRICS allies. The first reason as to why China will see a revival in their economy is because of a turbocharge through trade. Right now, the Carnegie Endowment for Peace described just 1 month ago that China's and BRICS' current economic situation has a whole mishmash of currencies, from the Brazilian real to the Russian ruble to the Chinese yuan, posing a lot of transaction costs that really destroys China's own ability to trade with different countries, harboring their own economic success, which has left a huge stain and plaguing impact on China's own economy. However, right now, the World Bank describes that back in August 14th of 2023, President Lula da Silva of Brazil described that all the BRICS nations should get a unified currency. Inherently, this would decrease transaction costs by 15%, spearheading economic growth and trade for all of the countries. And if we do see a unified yuan currency between all of the BRICS nations, it's clear that China and all of their BRICS allies will see a supply chain synergy from China's materials to India's manufacturing to South Africa's production. As a result, China and their own economy will prosper as more of their manufacturers and domestic workers can actually gain more experience in the field, and which will only lead to more economic success for China. For a long time, China has been second to the United States, and we can see that that might be able to change if China is able to gain a unified currency through the yuan with all of their BRICS allies. The second reason as to why China will see a revived economy is because of global financial power that they have. The New York Times describes that right now, the United States dollar is the most traded global currency across the entire world, leaving China in the dust. But this is something that China wants to reverse by a lot. The International Monetary Fund provides a fun statistic just 1 month ago that right now, in the next decade, China's yuan currency could be 15% of the global currency in the entire world. However, that's still not enough to overcome the United States' control over the global currency market right now. However, if China and their BRICS allies are able to gain control of this type of yuan unified currency with all of their other BRICS allies, you could see huge global financial power for China with the creation of a BRICS bank. This isn't just a few nations controlling the bank, but rather a whole block of nations leading the charge for the new future for the East, where financial institutions aren't controlled by the Western financial institutions anymore, but rather by ones in the East, led by China itself. With this new type of bank, with the BRICS bank that China could potentially create with their BRICS allies, China's economy will only grow even further, as many other export struggles will be eliminated because of further economic growth through creation of the bank and more economic success and commerce with other nations. It's clear that China actually wants to come back from periods of economic debilitation. And to do that, they need to align with other countries to gain huge global financial power with a unified yuan currency. But finally, technology continues to rule the entire world. And that's the third area of concern that China needs to attend to if they want to revive their own economy. The third and final reason as to why China will see a revival in their economy if all the BRICS nations have a unified China currency with yuan is because we're going to see a huge technological leap. CNBC describes just 1 month ago that China currently struggles because of the United States and Chinese technological war, which is severely hampering Chinese development when it comes to semiconductors and other technological products, leaving a huge stain on China's economy and their own technological innovation. However, if China gains more development when it comes to having a unified yuan currency with the other BRICS nations, all of them can come together to use that increased capital to invest more in technological innovation across the entire country. Right now, technological innovation is the key motive that many countries are going for when it comes to economic control of their nation and of the world. And if China can harness that, they will only see more success when it comes to years to come in the future. They can also use that technological innovation towards the energy sector as well, as CNBC describes 1 month ago. If China gains control of the non-renewable energy sector along with clean energy with new technological innovations from investment from a unified yuan currency, China will only see huge gains to come in the future. But finally, it seems that China can avoid this poo apocalypse if they can align with the other BRICS nations to find actual solutions going into the future. And because China really needs hope right now because of a struggling economy, it's imperative that we ask today's question. Hypothetical. After Xi Jinping loses Winnie the Pooh and throws a tantrum, and all the BRICS nations actually adopt the yuan currency, will it revive the Chinese economy? Which the answer is clearly yes, because China will gain control of all economic growth with the BRICS nations. And you can see this for 3 key reasons. First, because of a trade turbocharge. Second, because of economic global financial power. And finally, through technological leaps. But sure, this is all an economic dream for China, as they will only continue to struggle for years to come in the future.
Got a final time of 7 minutes and 10 seconds. We will now have a 3-minute cross. I will give the 2, the 1, 30, 15, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then I will say time at the fist just in case you guys can't hear me, can't see my screen during the cross if you get involved in it.
As always, great speech. I just have a couple of questions. So your first point is talking about how China is now going to establish this dominance because of this unified currency. And China currently trades with a lot of the countries in BRICS. So after the unification of the yuan currency, what specific benefits is China going to get now after they start to trade with these countries?
Well, as I highlighted in my first point, transaction costs is a huge problem that the BRICS alliance actually has to deal with every single time they make a trade, as it loses tons of money. So if they do have this unification when it comes to their currency, China could see a huge decrease in transaction costs, making trade turbocharged with other countries.
Would this decrease in cost still be enough to revive the entire Chinese economy, though?
Of course, but we could also see another domino impact and effect because other countries that are close to China and the BRICS alliance could actually join in on this unified yuan currency at the exact same time too, which would also support China's economic revival if they were to have this unified yuan currency.
Okay. Going on to your second point about the global financial state. So you state that China is going to become a superpower because of the unified currency. But considering that America is in the #1 spot, don't you think that America is going to try to hamper down the impacts that China will continue to have? And don't you think that they're going to end up being successful?
I'm sure America's definitely going to try, but like for the past 20 years, the United States and China have been locked in heavy competition when it comes to economic control over the entire world. And both sides always do more to get over the other. But a big thing that China could do if they actually have a unified yuan currency is, as I described earlier, the creation of a BRICS bank, where they have an entire block of nations to control an entire bank, leading to a shift of power over from Western financial institutions over to China and their allies, which could be a huge benefit to China's economy and commerce, which could put them above the United States when it comes to global control of the economy.
Okay, and going on to your final point about technology, what's stopping technological advancements to happen right now in China, given that they still have access to these countries, and what's stopping them right now?
A huge part is the United States and China trade war or technological war that is actually going on. The United States has placed a lot of restrictions on lots of Chinese products when it comes to semiconductors and other technological advancements. Sure, China can just trade with other countries, but because they can't have as much economic interaction with the United States as before, that's a huge stain on China's own success when it comes to trade with other countries, such as the United States.
I mean, America is still going to try to reduce their dependence on China. So, adding these countries, is it going to make much of an impact to the point where China's economy completely revives itself?
Yes, because China would essentially grow closer to all of these BRICS alliances to a point where they will eventually control all of global commerce in the entire world.
Fine.
Thank you.
I'd like to introduce our third speaker, Anthony, who's going to be answering the question or hypothetical scenario. Clarence Thomas grows a conscience, and the Supreme Court upholds Colorado and Maine's removal of Trump from the 2024 presidential ballot. Can Trump still win the 2024 election? Anthony, are you ready to go?
I'll just wait for Robert, and I have to make sure I'm in frame here, but...
Yeah, good to go? Awesome. Anthony, Max has already gone over time signals with you.
To make sure I'm in frame. Okay,
Yeah.
awesome. So in that case, everybody's good? No, I'm
Did you
good.
still like time signals or no?
For this one. Time signal god. Okay. If everybody's cool, I'll go ahead and start my time now. The 2024 presidential race is an interesting one. I mean, it has all of the classic characters from any classic family sitcom. The wise grandpa, who the directors are definitely going to kill off at the end of the season, Joe Biden. The crazy rich uncle, Donald Trump, and the little kid running around in the background for comic relief, Vivek Ramaswamy. I mean, heck, throw in a long-lost sibling and a rich grandmother, and you have like 10 seasons of basically any NBC soap opera. You just know that Lester Holt would gobble that up. But thankfully for him, and the rest of us who just love to watch the chaos, this show's only getting more spicy. As the New York Times contextualized just 10 hours ago, that now Maine has joined Colorado in becoming the first two states to ban Trump from their primary ballots, citing the 14th Amendment, introduced after the Civil War, which states that no one who has engaged in insurrection against the Union can hold public office, but also opening the door to a blanket Supreme Court ruling, which could decide whether these bans are constitutional and open up the door to more bans in the future. So considering that these 2024 elections could decide whether these United States of America remain truly united, we have to pose today's hypothetical. Clarence Thomas grows a conscience, and the Supreme Court upholds Colorado and Maine's removal of Trump from the 2024 presidential ballot. Can Trump still win the 2024 election? And the answer is yes, because these bans in the long run likely wouldn't have a meaningful effect, in three main ways. First, because Trump would only be banned in blue states that he never could have won anyways. Second, because Trump remains the likely Republican nominee. And finally, because any Republican nominee is likely to win, thanks to Biden's lack of approval right now. But first, the states that would be banning Donald Trump are the same color as my face when I realized I have to do Crossfire after this. Blue. Which takes us to the first point, that these bans wouldn't have an effect because they would only be instituted in blue states that Trump never could have won anyways. We can look to statistics from Politico magazine after the 2020 elections to find that both Maine and Colorado fairly overwhelmingly voted for Biden in the 2020 elections, so a ban would only represent a marginal increase to the status quo. And that's crucial and applicable to future scenarios. When we look to what Reuters told us just 2 hours ago, which is that efforts to remove Trump from ballots are primarily being spearheaded by left-wing officials and Trump's political foes, which means that, dependent on further state Supreme Court rulings, Donald Trump would only be banned from blue states that likely would have never voted for him anyways, which means that as long as Trump secures support from the red and purple states, which won him the election in 2016, we can see that in 2024, Donald Trump will still have a very fair chance at the election. But ultimately, the probability that the Republicans don't nominate Trump for the election is even less than the probability of Clarence Thomas growing a conscience and forcing us to pose this hypothetical, taking us to the second point, that Donald Trump is surely still going to be the Republican nominee. We can look to what the Washington Post documented on August 1st of 2023 to find that Donald Trump holds the largest primary lead of any candidate in history that has ever gone on to lose. That is, no primary lead as big as Donald Trump's has ever been lost before, meaning something monumental would have to happen internally to Trump with his Republican voters to lose the nomination. 538, a nonpartisan polling service, further put it into perspective just yesterday by further explaining that since that Washington Post article was released, Donald Trump gained yet another 5% support. Donald Trump's polling lead is so immense that something absolutely monumental would have to happen to him in order to lose further support. And considering that all of these state bans and legal woes have only ended up increasing his support over the course of this year, we can see that as long as Donald Trump is the Republican nominee, he has a fair chance, especially when we look to the final point, because at the end of the day, Biden's approval ratings are kind of like Biden himself. They won't stop falling down, which takes us to the final point, that Joe Biden's lack of appeal means that any Republican nominee is likely going to win the election. We can look to statistics from Gallup, who quantified just 7 days ago that Joe Biden sits at a measly 39% approval. And that's bad not just for his current favorability, but for his future electability, especially since statistics from Bloomberg Magazine, released in January of 2022, found that most presidential candidates who were incumbents and then went on to win a second term had over 50% approval rating at the end of their first term, which means that Joe Biden would have to radically win support of Americans fast if he wants a significant chance at 2024. And especially considering that the factors that are driving a lack of appeal for Biden right now, such as his age, are only going to get worse as more time progresses and we near the 2024 elections. We can see not only that blue states are not going to be as excited to turn out for Biden, opening the door to further Trump upsets independent of whether he's banned, but also that red states and conservative voters are going to have extra motivation to turn out in droves and vote for their guy, who we saw in the second point is likely to be Donald Trump, and we saw in the first point, for them, is likely to be on the ballot. So when returning to today's hypothetical, when the Supreme Court sides with Democrats, much thanks to Clarence Thomas growing a conscience, and upholds state bans of Trump being on the ballot, we can see that it's not going to harm Trump's electoral chances, whether it's because the bans won't directly affect him because they'll be in blue states, or the fact that Trump is always going to be the Republican nominee, or finally, that Joe Biden is ever more unelectable. We can see that in the long run, even though the days of our lives will consist about hearing of this presidential sitcom for long more than we'd like, it appears that the next 4 seasons are going to be dominated by Plot A of the Trump administration. So I had that at 7:07.
I had it at 7:06, so yeah.
Awesome.
All right, there will be a 3-minute cross. You will get the 2, the 1, 30, 15, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then I will say time at 3 minutes, as well as a fist.
Awesome. Great speech, Anthony, as always. As always, I just have a few questions. So Donald Trump is only taken off the ballot for Colorado and Maine for the GOP primary ballot, correct?
So far, yes.
So how would that have any impact on the presidential election? Because he'd still be on the ballot for Colorado and Maine for the presidential election. Like,
This question specifically refers to the 2024 presidential ballot, which indicates that we're talking about the presidential election.
but he's still on the ballot, correct?
Well, the Maine and Colorado vote is banning Trump from election at all. Even if this specific ruling only applied to the primary ballot, they can simply use their own legal precedent and apply it to the presidential ballot. But either way, we can see that Trump is already likely to win the election regardless.
Okay, so let's move on to your first point. So wouldn't Trump getting taken off the ballot for Colorado and Maine for the GOP primary ballot discourage voter turnout from his base?
So this is specifically referring to the presidential ballot. But either way, I think that's ignoring the thesis of my first point, which is that this is only happening in blue states, which means that GOP turnout in those states effectively doesn't matter. As long as GOP turnout in red and purple states is high, Donald Trump will still have a very fair chance at winning the election.
Okay, let's go to your second point about Trump still going to be the Republican nominee. So what about other Democrats and moderate voters who are leaving Trump and supporting Nikki Haley in her campaign?
If that was having a meaningful effect, we would see a more meaningful difference in the Republican polls right now, where Donald Trump is miles ahead of all of the other candidates, polling at over 60%, which, as the Washington Post told us on August 1st of this year, is larger than the largest primary lead that's ever been lost.
Won't Donald Trump's indictments and felony charges have an effect on his campaign?
In reality, we've seen that as Donald Trump has had more charges piled on him over the course of this year, we've seen him also gain voter support. For example, on February 1st of this year, Donald Trump was sitting in the low 40s, but now he's sitting at the low 60s, indicating that his legal woes aren't having a huge effect on his campaign in the status quo.
Awesome. So on your third point, won't Biden's more moderate image attract swing voters from purple states and other independents who dislike the current political polarization away from Trump?
If they dislike current political polarization, then voting for the Democrats isn't really better than voting for the Republicans, because both sides are effectively equally guilty in voters' minds of perpetuating polarization, as both candidates take on more extreme perspectives to appeal to a broader voting base. But either way, if that was true, we would see a higher approval rating and polling rate against Trump going into the start of next year.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for a really awesome crossfire. And that's it.
All right, that concludes the final round of the EIF Winter Championship. Thank you so much to Max for giving time signals, and thank you so much to the rest of our judge panel for participating, and of course, for our competitors for making this final round as lively as it was. I look forward to seeing all of you guys at the award ceremony, which I believe is happening tonight, and hopefully at future EIF tournaments. Have a good one, y'all.